3, 2, 1. Coming to you live as it's been live. Pay attention, Dad. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, a lot going on. The tickets are set. The battle is going to rage. But as you know, if you're a follower of the keys, all these ephemeral events of the campaign in the end count for little or nothing.
Right. I want to give a shout out to some people in the chat. Jarathe Moen, who just became a member. Patrick Murray,
Nice.
Night Guardian, George W., G1, Rainbow Kitty, Carl Waterbury, Grace Water, Sandy FL, Rusty Shack, Lauren Pollard, Delta, Jim Solmer, Mystery Girl, William Dang. A lot of great people in the chat, Dad.
How many do we have right now?
I don't know. It hasn't loaded up yet on my screen.
Okay,
Takes a
doesn't
second.
matter.
So as you mentioned, the ticket's set. It'll be Harris-Walz versus Trump-Vance. What's on your mind this week, Dad?
Well, several things. First of all, the debate looks like
Oh, yeah.
it was off. Donald Trump said he wasn't going to debate at that biased ABC on September 10th, even though he had earlier agreed to debate at the biased ABC with the Democratic candidate. But now, all of a sudden, imagine that Donald Trump turning around agrees in something he said. Now he said, not only will I agree to debate on September 10th, but, with usual Trump bluster, I want to have other debates as well. We'll see if, that means anything at all.
What do you think
But
made
it
him?
does look like.
What do you think made him turn
What?
around?
I'm about to
Oh,
get to that, of course. But let me finish my thought. So we don't know whether, Donald Trump means he really wants to have the debates, whether they can agree on venues, whether they could agree on days and times. But, you never know in the world of Trump, right? But at the moment, it looks like the originally scheduled September 10th debate is now on between Harris and Trump. It's very much up in the air whether there will be a vice presidential debate, as there usually is, and if so, what the venue and the time and the day for such a debate might be. So there's still a lot to be resolved, but at least as we sit here on Thursday night, right, Sam? August 8th, 2024, it looks like a Harris debate against Donald Trump is now on the books. Stay tuned.
hey, you're drinking a LaCroix. That's much healthier than your usual diet
Yeah,
soda.
one of our brilliant people in the audience said I should cut down on Diet Coke, which
Right.
your brilliant mom has been telling me for years I need to do. So
Right. It was my idea to drink LaCroix, though.
it was a great idea. I have a whole case of LaCroix now. So
Wow,
why
cases of LaCroix.
a case of LaCroix? I'm going to be ridiculously healthy.
Wow.
I'll break all my records in the Senior Olympics.
Right.
Not that I hold any records, but at least my personal records.
Right.
So, why did Trump do this? I have no inside information, but I can speculate that when he at first refused, he thought, based on the polls, which Trump is obsessed with, although he, as I'll see in a moment, he doesn't accurately reflect them in his public statements, but I think he believed he didn't need to debate because he was ahead and can win without a debate. But now, hey, wow. So someday you can be as healthy as me. But now he understands that the polls have turned pretty heavily against him.
Right.
The latest 538 average of polls, which I think understates the difference because it has a lot of earlier polls, now has Harris nationally ahead by 2 points. And the Cook Political Report, and you've heard me talk about the Cook Political Report previously, a very reliable source of conventional wisdom, and I'm not endorsing any of this, but I think all of this has influenced Donald Trump, has now moved Arizona, Georgia, Arizona and Georgia, two very questionable states, and Nevada, now favoring Harris rather than Trump. So I do think this turn of events in the polls explains why Donald Trump now believes he has to debate, because he now believes he's behind, not ahead, and he feels, well, I have nothing to lose. At least maybe a debate will shake up the contours of the race. Now, further developments. Donald Trump held a press conference, went on for almost 40 minutes. And what do you think he did in the press conference, Sam?
Went on about his election denial.
Right. But beyond that, what does he do when he speaks?
What does he do when he speaks?
Yes. When Donald Trump speaks, you can be sure that he is
lying.
Lying. Yes. And this time, the fact checkers at CNN and the Washington Post and other places were right on it, almost immediately debunking a host of the grossest lies. Not even going to go over again all his lies about the stolen election. He had a bunch of new lies. Get this. He said no one died as a result of what happened on January 6th. There were 7 deaths documented, either directly or indirectly, due to the January 6th insurrection, including one of Trump's staunchest supporters. You know who that was, Sam? Who got shot and killed?
Ashley Babbitt was her name or something?
Ashley Babbitt, because she was illegally trying to break into a congressional chamber. So the idea that no one was killed, we've known about these deaths for years, and yet Donald Trump, I mean, who would believe that? It is not a subtle lie, but Donald Trump doesn't deal in subtlety. Then also in terms of people being killed, he claimed, I spoke to a Taliban leader back when I was president, and there weren't any Americans shot at after that. 13 Americans were shot and killed after he spoke to the Taliban leader. Then he compared himself to Martin Luther King Jr. We know he loves to compare himself absurdly to Abraham Lincoln. There have been lots of surveys of people who actually know American politics and history. Where does Abraham Lincoln rank?
1.
Where does Donald Trump rank?
46.
Last. But this guy has the audacity to compare himself to Abraham Lincoln, something no other president, no matter how great, Franklin Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan, none of them claimed to be equal to Abraham Lincoln. But he said, my crowd at the National Mall on January 6th was at least as great or even greater than the crowd that Martin Luther King was able to bring to the National Mall for his I Have a Dream speech. Was that true, Sam?
I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. Right. In fact, crowd estimates are tricky, but the best estimate is that Martin Luther King's crowd was not slightly larger than Trump's, was 5 times larger approximately, 250,000 versus 53,000. And he continued to mispronounce Kamala Harris's name as if, to emphasize that she wasn't a real American, that she was a foreigner, and a host of other, also saying, I'm way ahead in the polls. No, none of the polling averages have you ahead. And that's why, because you've fallen behind, you agreed to debate. Yet you get in front of a national audience and somehow make it up that you're way ahead in the polls. The other gross lie is that 75% of the American people support him. What's the highest vote he got in 2 elections, approximately? Was it 75%?
It was like 48 or something. I don't know.
Like 46%, exactly. Yeah. Not even a majority, much less 75%. Has his approval rating ever reached 75%?
Has any presidents?
Yes, there
Oh,
have been some.
oh,
George H.W. Bush hit close to 90 after the Gulf War.
oh.
But Donald Trump, for 10 years, has been stuck in the low 40% range. So, this idea that, an overwhelming majority of American people support him is just another blatant lie. And the fact checkers were instant. I mean, these lies were so gross and so easily debunked that the fact checkers were virtually instantly able to show off and debunk all his lies. I'm not going to go, these are just some of the highlights. There were many, many more lies that he perpetrated. I'm not going to go over every single one of them. And Republicans have already started to swift boat Tim Walz. You know what it means to swift boat a candidate? You know where that comes from? What election?
I have no idea.
2004. John Kerry, the Democratic candidate, was a multi-decorated war hero from the Vietnam War. Did George W. Bush, his opponent, serve in the Vietnam War?
No. Oh, they're they're
No.
they're saying he's like stolen valor or something, right?
This is what they're claiming about Tim Walz. I'll
Right,
get to
right,
that.
right,
But I want to give you the background.
right.
So you have this guy, multi-decorated Vietnam War hero. His opponent used his, extensive family connections to stay in the National Guard and never serve in Vietnam. And they then launched a smear campaign, so-called, uh, what John Kerry served on these little swift boats, that plied the rivers in Vietnam. One of the most perilous, one of the most dangerous assignments you could possibly have, and deserved all his accolades and all his medals. And they fabricated a whole series of stories claiming he was a phony, he wasn't really a war hero, he didn't deserve these medals. And about 20% of the American voters were persuaded. I hate to say it, one of those involved in this was one of my best friends from graduate school. I think you've heard me talk about him. Do you remember who it was?
No.
Jerome Corsi, who also helped perpetrate Donald Trump's biggest, most racist, most protracted lie in the history of American politics, even before he ran for office. What was that huge racist lie?
That Obama wasn't born in America.
Exactly, that the first African American president was really born in Africa, of course, and could not possibly have been born in Hawaii. And Jerome Corsi was very much involved in perpetrating that. And now they're trying to swift boat Tim Walz. He had served 24 years in the National Guard. He retired from the National Guard to run for Congress. And they're smearing him by saying he retired from the National Guard to avoid being deployed to Iraq. In fact, he retired from the Guard months before his unit was ordered to deploy to Iraq, and quite explicitly said, I'm getting out of the National Guard because I'm running for Congress. And he won his election in a very mixed, very moderate, tightly balanced Republican versus Democrat. Had nothing to do with his trying to get out of being deployed to Iraq. So we're getting a new version. The other way they're trying to swift boat him is Donald Trump claimed that as governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz simply let the rioters run amok until Donald Trump had to step in and call in the National Guard. Well, reporters have totally debunked that. They uncovered a recording, a contemporary one, not 1 year later, in which Donald Trump effusively praises, guess who, for his response to the BLM protests.
Tim Walz.
Tim Walz, what a great job you did. And not only that, Tim Walz called out the National Guard, not Donald Trump. The journalists had two emails, one from Walz on the 28th, calling out the Guard, another one from Trump mentioning the Guard for the first time. So the swift boating of Tim Walz has begun. But, we'll see if the spineless Democrats have grown a spine and are able to effectively respond to these attacks. And of course, we all know the attacks on Kamala Harris, the blatant misogynist and sexist attacks on her, hearkening back to the era of discriminatory Jim Crow when white people defined the racial identity of black people and used it against them. Donald Trump has taken us right back to that horrific era of American history.
Also with the Tim Walz thing, he also retired after, I believe, 24 years of serving. So it's not like he joined and immediately he was there for 24 years.
Yeah. There were a few aspects, in fairness, of his record they had to clear up. Technically, although he reached the highest level of Master Sergeant, technically he did not hold that rank when he retired. He just held the Master Sergeant rank. And at one point he did misspeak, saying, I carried these weapons in war. But years ago, he made very clear that he did not engage in combat, but engaged in very significant overseas duty, training our troops in the use of various weaponry. And he had been involved in so much cannon fire that he lost his hearing and had to get an operation on his ears, and said, for the first time after my operation, I heard my little girl sing. It was, it was quite genuine and quite moving. And by the way, J.D. Vance, although he did deploy, I think it was in Iraq or I think maybe Afghanistan, did not see combat. He was not a combat officer. And of course, Donald Trump is notorious for what, Sam? When it comes to combat.
Dodger.
Draft dodging, bone spurs, which didn't seem to handicap him in anything but going into the military.
Right. You want to get to some questions, or you got everything off your mind?
No, but I think I'm ready for some questions. I got much more in my mind, but I want to hear the questions.
All right.
And let me say something. I'm not sure it applies to our terrific audience, but I get a lot of emails asking me detailed questions about the keys and my analysis. Let me make it clear. I don't engage in extensive conversations about the keys on email. I don't know who is emailing me. I've been burned before. People have taken things I've said on email, pulled them out of context, and used them against me. So I'm not going to engage, and nor do I have the time, in discussions with people who query me on email. My response is always, what's my response, Sam? Check in.
Read the book, watch the lives.
Read the book and check in on the live show. You want to ask me a question? Ask me it openly on the live show. That's why we have this show. Not just to hear me talk, although that's part of it, but to give you an opportunity to answer questions and get my unvarnished responses. But don't bombard me with a bunch of email questions or, text questions or telephone questions. Ask your questions on the live show. Does that make sense, Sam?
Yeah, me too. People are starting to, send me long. I'm just like, I can't answer this. Yeah. All right, let's get to.
Don't, because you don't know who anyone is, on email, and your words will be taken out of context and twisted.
Let's get to some of these questions. Speaking of the questions on the live show.
Yes, I will answer all questions here. That's what this is for.
Right. Blake Gresham says, false reporting said Harris is considering arms embargo for Israel. She never said that, but did engage with uncommitted voters. There's fear she'll pull a Carter lackluster showing from Jewish Dems. I doubt Jew Dems will spitefully stay home. What do you think?
I don't think so. That was one of the lies that I didn't get to. There were so many of them that Trump perpetrated, saying, she was for an arms embargo to Israel. Absolutely untrue. If anything, it was the Republicans in Congress who delayed aid to Israel, and the Democratic leadership, including Harris, that was pushing for it. He also lied and said she wants to confiscate people's guns because she advocated a buyback program, which is voluntary, doesn't confiscate anyone's guns. And no Democratic leader or Kamala Harris or the gun control advocacy groups have ever talked about confiscating guns. That's another big lie scare tactic. I wrote a whole book about this and talked about, all of the various gun control proposals that are out there, none of which involve the confiscation of guns.
We got to get you to pronounce Kamala's name correctly, man.
Didn't I say Kamala?
You said Kamala, like a
no.
camel. It's
Kamala.
like comma, like the punctuation, comma,
Kamala.
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 Okay. You don't want to be in the same vein as Donald Trump now, do you?
Well, it's a little different.
Yes,
He's pronouncing her name like she was some, remote foreigner.
Yes. Okay. Next question from member CL Grassi. They say, Professor Lichtman, can you comment on the severe threat that white Christian nationalism poses to our democracy and the importance of their voting bloc to Trump's base?
The answer is yes and yes. White Christian nationalists and generally far-right terrorists are by far, it's not even close, by far pose the greatest domestic terrorist threat and have been responsible for more terrorist domestic deaths than any other group, including jihadists, and by a huge margin more responsible than any left-wing groups. It's well documented by statistics from the government and independent groups. And indeed, so many involved in the white Christian nationalist movement, which Trump and his allies to a great extent have embraced, don't believe in democracy. They believe they, have a pipeline to the Almighty. The Almighty tells them what we should do, and they're ready to impose all of those things on the rest of us.
Focus.
No, I had to scratch out a call.
Oh, okay.
I was focused.
Okay.
That was a very focused answer.
Dudley Murdoch says, it is highly unlikely there will be a repeat of the 2000 election. What do you think?
I think it is unlikely. I mean, a whole series of, amazing events converge to produce the controversial election of 2000. The fact that the Electoral College was virtually tied, that the election boiled down to a single state of Florida, that Florida's governor was the brother of whom, Sam?
Jeb Bush, George W. Bush, Florida.
Yes, was the brother of the Republican candidate. Further, that it boiled down to 537 votes because the Supreme Court stopped the recount. That's over 6 million cast. And that many, many tens of thousands of African American votes were unreasonably discarded to give the election to Bush, even though based on the intent of the voters, as I proved in my report to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, Gore should Florida going away. So there was just an incredible confluence of events, virtually a perfect storm that is unlikely to be repeated.
Member David N. says, Professor Lichtman, while the 13 Keys is based on historical data, wouldn't predicting the outcome of presidential elections more properly belong in the field of political science than history?
Absolutely not. Political sciences base their models on history. What else can you base it on? You've got to base your models on a record of past elections and test it against that record. So in effect, every political science model is based upon historical data and historical analysis. The difference in my model is it has a vastly more extensive record than, as far as I know, any other political science model It goes all the way back to 1860 in its development and in successful advanced predictions back to my prediction of Ronald Reagan's reelection in April 1982. And by the way, I presented in 2020 at the American Political Science Association my Keys model, and it was billed by the political scientists as a classical model of election forecasting. I also twice keynoted the International Forecasting Summit. So my work has been very much acclaimed and accepted among many disciplines, including political science.
Fit Girl 1963 says, do you think Donald Trump is manipulating the keys to his advantage since he knows about your prediction from 2016?
I don't think Donald Trump is capable of doing that. That would require really a great deal of effort and energy and a true mastermind. I think Donald Trump would want to, but I don't think he has the capacity. The other thing is the keys are hard to manipulate. You can't just create a recession or create a big foreign policy failure when you're out of power and you're the opposition candidate. There's not much you can do to manipulate keys. They tried. They tried to pin a scandal on Joe Biden and turn the scandal key, and they failed miserably.
Right. Real Stritchemeyer says, how could you have possibly called the keys for Obama in early 2010? There was no Affordable Care Act yet, which was the policy change key. Bin Laden hadn't died. It seems to me that would have been way too early to tell.
Well, there was the Affordable Care Act in 2010. That's when it was passed.
Why are you calling me?
Not. It's not as far as I know. Maybe I should shut my phone off. How about that? That way I won't bother anyone.
Sounds good.
I think you're going to say I'm not the greatest with technology.
I think I would say that.
But that's not why anyone listens to me. I'm not, Bill Nye, the technology guy.
What is going on?
In 2010,
you're calling me again.
I just turned my phone off. My phone is off. It can't be me.
What the heck? What the heck is going on? That's so weird.
I don't know. Maybe someone's hacked into my phone. I wouldn't put it past them. But my phone is off. So I can't be calling you.
Huh. Weird. Okay. Well, all right, keep going.
See, we've become so prominent that the hackers are after us.
Russian hackers.
Who knows who's going to come after us next?
Yes.
But at any rate, so the Affordable Care Act was passed. You had an incumbent president, no third party on the horizon.
This is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. You're calling me. I'm getting a call from your number again.
My phone is blank. Someone is hacked.
Jeez,
Call the white hat hackers to protect us, but my phone is off.
That is strange. Okay, all right.
Really strange. So, I didn't see any big foreign policy disasters. I didn't see the Republicans coming up with a charismatic nominee. Obama was about as clean as one could get. The economy was looking good. So, yeah, there were, very few keys that I could foresee against him, but nowhere near enough to turn 6 keys. And, of course, I was right. And who was wrong, Sam, in attacking me?
Nate Silver, the clerk.
Nate Silver, out of the blue, gratuitously, writes a 30-page paper attacking me, saying, you can't predict this early. And, of course, being a professor, what did I do, Sam? I wrote a 30-page response.
Oh.
And the basic message was, you can't, because you use polls, which are useless at this time, and even useless when you get to the election. But I can, because the keys tap into the structure of how elections really work. Ultimately, I do believe Silver came around very late, and I wrote him a really sweet email saying, let's write a joint article explaining how 2 different forecasters ultimately came to the same view. And what did I get in response, Sam?
Crickets.
Crickets, nothing. Not even thank you, for the offer, but I'll politely decline. Nothing. So at many levels, uh, Nate Silver is not my favorite person, and I can't independently verify this, but I've heard that since he was bounced out of 538, he is now being sponsored by another one of these, extreme right-wing billionaires, the kinds who are sponsoring Clarence Thomas, Peter Thiel.
Thank you, Doris Barrios. They sent us $50 and said, "Thank you for all you do and for keeping us sane. I appreciate you, Professor Lichtman."
Thank you. Keep those donations and memberships coming. That keeps us on the air.
Matt Jacobson says, "I find if keys 6, 8, 10 are discarded, the prediction model performs the same, with the same 6-key threshold. From 1860 on, this improves Harris's chances of winning. Is there a reason to distrust this?" Never heard that before.
I've never heard that before. I think I got an email from someone saying that, but obviously I haven't gone through 160 years of elections on some alternative system to either verify or falsify what is being claimed here.
Member Persephone Godwin Music says, "Will the incredible new momentum and joy for Harris-Walz spread to the party and now speed up your prediction?"
It's not going to speed up my prediction.
I've
made it pretty clear. I'm being very conservative and waiting till after the Democratic convention. No reason to speed up. That's not far away. It starts, what, in 11 days.
Right. No, not necessary. Vincent Escalano says, "If Donald Trump sparked social unrest like January 6th and the majority of the public blamed him, would the key still count against Harris?"
Well, remember, January 6th occurred well after the election. So if Donald Trump is unhappy with the election and sparks social unrest, that's not going to affect the prediction or the outcome of the election. Moreover, let me say Donald Trump has been an abject failure in sparking protests. When he was on trial in New York for serious felonies, not for paying hush money, but for election fraud and tax fraud, he called upon his supporters to come and protest in the thousands. And how many showed up, Sam?
Not thousands.
Not even hundreds. I think there were more cops than there were protesters. And who else, remarkably, never showed up at his trial to support him?
Melania.
His wife. That's just astonishing. Even serial killers have, their families showing up to support them in the trial, but not Donald Trump. So he really has, despite calling for bloodbaths and civil disorder and making all kinds of threats, he's been a big bust when it's come to generating even modest protests. And remember, to turn the key, it's got to be protests so massive and so significant as to call into question the stability of the country.
That's what I was about to say.
Can't be scattered protests.
I was going to say, I don't think you can garner a protest to turn the key.
I'd say the chances are slim and none.
Member Pull Pulse says, "What are the odds the keys change over the next couple of weeks?"
Well, that's why I'm waiting, because there are a number of uncertain keys, and it is possible. I've discussed this many times. By the way, also in response to your question, remember we had a show a little while ago about some of the negative signals on the economy. And I told everyone to calm down. The chances of a recession, despite this, were still low. Recession indicators are not a recession. We're not in recession. The chances are small. And since then, the economy is looking much better. Jobless claims were under expectations. The stock market gained almost 700 points today. And most significantly, one of our brilliant members of our audience pointed this out to me, the Atlanta Federal Reserve now estimates a 2.9% GDP real growth rate in the third quarter. And that was seconded by the Center for Quantitative Economic Research. That's way out beyond any even remote possibility of a recession. So I'd say the chances of a recognized recession by the National Bureau of Economic Research, which is the authority that monitors these things, not me, before November is once again slim and none.
Ill King says, considering there's no campaign key, do campaigns really not matter at all? Hard to believe so much money and effort would be spent if they had no impact.
I have a long answer to this. Should I give the long answer?
It's up to you.
All right. I'm going to give the long answer because it's of critical importance. You've heard me, Sam, talk about Dwight Eisenhower's 1961 farewell address, the most important farewell address since George Washington. And do you remember what he warned against?
No.
The military-industrial complex and their grip on the country, which is sustained by an iron unbreakable triangle. One point are the defense contractors who make huge money. Another point are the military who get the hardware they want. A third point is the politicians who want military contracts in their states and their districts. Iron Triangle, since 1961, has not been broken. I developed the idea of the political industrial complex and its grip on our politics to tie us into this phony horse race view of elections where candidates sprint ahead or fall behind based upon the day-to-day events of the campaign, and the pollsters keep score. And that leads us into this trivial, soundbite-driven, negative campaign-driven, non-substantive kind of campaigns. And the political industrial complex has its own iron triangle, which I've been trying to break for decades and haven't succeeded. On one point are the pollsters, the consultants, the ad men who make huge amounts of money from this horse race view of elections. Then there's the media who has to cover the election every day and thus buys into the horse race. And then there are the politicians who are afraid to go up against the consultants, the pollsters, the pundits, the ad men, and the media. And so they buy into this phony horse race view of elections that demeans and trivializes our politics. That's why you're seeing what you see for so long.
Member Miles Wolf asks, do you feel the keys suggest that Americans ask too much or too little of the incumbent administration?
I think they ask just enough. It's absolutely quite right and fair and rational for the American people to make the judgment, has the party controlling the White House governed well enough to get another 4 years? It's a vastly more rational, more reasonable judgment than following, the ads and the dirty tricks and the debates of the campaign.
Luis Aldolfo Peña Florentino with
very good, Sam.
Thank you. With $1,000
wow.
Dominican peso donation, which is about $15. But thank you for your donation. It's not $1,000. I didn't want to get you too excited. They say no.
All donations are welcome.
Right. They say no question, but I want to thank you, Professor, for your work and greetings from the Dominican Republic.
Great to hear that. I'd love to visit you there.
Dudley Murdoch, thank you for your donation. I think it's more of a statement than a question. President Scrooge says, which way are you leaning with the prisoner exchange and the success key, the military/foreign success key?
I haven't made a decision on that, but I think it's questionable. It seems to have been swept away by other events, but we'll see.
Member Strawn Slinger says, could the debate, even though it doesn't make a difference in the keys, make a further impression on either Trump or Harris, potentially swinging public view in a dramatic way, somewhat similar to the current views on Biden?
Well, the Biden episode was kind of sui generis. Never seen anything like that before. And it fed into a narrative that was already, reverberating about his age and diminishment throughout the country. But beyond that, debates don't predict election outcomes. Remember, Hillary Clinton won every debate, some of them by wide margins, and still lost. John Kerry in 2004 won the debates and still lost. So you can't predict outcomes based upon debates.
I think
they're fun, and I'll watch them, but they're not predictive.
I think their question was more gauged towards like, could we see something like what happened to Biden? And again, we don't know if it affected the election or not, but we sure know it affected his campaign a lot, right?
Absolutely. That's very smart, Sam, and could happen to Trump. The story of Trump's diminishment has been kind of lost in, all the stories about Biden. But there's plenty of evidence that Trump is substantially diminished. After all, he confused Nancy Pelosi and Nikki Haley, couldn't get straight the name of his longtime doctor, ranted about the late, great Hannibal Lecter, talked about whether you'd rather be electrocuted by, whether you'd rather die from electrocution or a shark bite. And just, I think, yesterday, had this incoherent rant about Joe Biden storming into the Democratic convention and demanding that he would get the nomination back. What utter nonsense.
Lauren Burnson says, assuming Trump loses and then tries to steal the election again, continuing to threaten violence just like last time, could this repeated offender actually be arrested and charged with treason?
He certainly can be arrested. I'm not sure he could be charged with treason. Treason has very, very specific requirements and usually applies in wartime, but he can certainly be arrested and charged with a whole host of other crimes. Remember, last time he was the sitting president, so he wasn't going to arrest himself. This time he's not the sitting president. Joe Biden is. And certainly Joe Biden could order his arrest as part of his official acts. And what does the Supreme Court say about official acts, Sam?
You can do whatever the heck you want.
You can do whatever you want. You're totally covered by immunity. You can, order your Justice Department to imprison Donald Trump, and the Supreme Court said that's just fine.
Crafting with Amy says, I want to thank you both. I have a question. Could you explain the election deniers from your video yesterday, please? Thank you.
Yeah. Remember, everyone focuses on the January 6th insurrection, as well they should. Contrary to Trump's lies, 140 police officers were injured, 7 direct or indirect deaths from it. It wasn't, a tourist visit with police just ushering in the insurrectionists like Trump has claimed. Another key element of it was the fake elector scheme. That is, Trump and his associates organized slates of fake electors in swing states. These electors were not chosen by the people. They were simply fabricated by Trump and his supporters. Now they've gone a step farther. Rather, they want to control the vote at its source by putting into state and particularly county officials in swing states election deniers who might well be unwilling to certify even a perfectly legitimate vote in their county or state that went against Donald Trump. We saw that at the state level, even in Georgia, where 3 Trump supporters on the state board of elections voted to give these county officials discretion in deciding whether votes should count, rather than what they're supposed to be doing, just counting the votes as they come in, not making decisions about which vote should count or should not count. And, I think I said the way to deal with this is to get a lot of poll watchers to make sure there aren't shenanigans, and to have teams of lawyers at the ready to make sure that they will go right into court to guarantee that these officials follow the law and don't manipulate results. And then just this afternoon on one of the news programs, uh, the retired uh, Judge Ludwig, a very conservative judge, but someone who's concerned about our democracy. I don't know if he followed our live show, Sam, and followed our suggestion, but he did. He called upon the American Bar Association to motivate large teams of lawyers to make sure that this election would not be manipulated.
Yeah, and my research from yesterday doing that video, I read about a woman named Julie Adams in Fulton County who is on the Fulton County Board of Elections, and even in the primary, she was already starting to, kick dust around and try not to certify just the primary election results.
It's
So
astonishing
that's
the
what,
length.
yeah, I was just gonna say that.
And she was one of those on the board who voted to give these officials much more discretion in making decisions. You know, back in 1800, the Federalists tried to steal the election of 1800. They knew the Federalist Party was a declining party. The nation was moving in another direction. Thomas Jefferson was going to be elected president. So they proposed a committee of the Congress, since the Federalists were still holding the Congress, that would decide which votes would count and which votes wouldn't. Essentially, what Donald Trump asked Mike Pence unconstitutionally and illegally to do. So, in that way, they could throw out Jefferson votes and put John Adams, the Federalist, in office. And it came perilously close to passing. Now we're seeing the modern day version of that effort.
Member Jasa says, if Alito and Thomas retire or pass, what are the chances, in your opinion, that Dems can fill those seats? A lot is riding on Tester and Brown, and I fear that a simple majority of the Senate is impossible.
You're absolutely right. I don't think if the Republicans had a majority, or maybe not a paper thin majority, but a more substantial majority like they had in 2016, I don't think they would confirm any nominee by a Democratic president. You know, there could not have been a more qualified nominee than Merrick Garland. And you've heard me roundly criticize him as Attorney General, but he was maybe the best federal appeals court judge in the country. Could not have been a more qualified nominee, and the Republicans wouldn't even hold a hearing, much less a vote on Merrick Garland.
Kathy V says, I hope this makes sense. If a key is already read, for example, if key 10 was already read, and another failure were to happen, would it affect the keys since the 10th key would already be read?
No. Well, the thing about the keys is they're binary. They're either true or false. They're not very true or very false.
Member Mr. Jack says, according to your keys, the Democrats would have been in a better position to win in November if they kept Biden, even though there's a huge enthusiasm gap between him and Harris. How is that possible?
Well, I was saying the Democrats should keep Biden for two reasons. One, it would preserve the incumbency key. And two, it looked like the spineless Democrats were pushing for an open convention, which would have cost them the contest key. It would have cost them two keys. No White House party has ever been reelected when they've lost both of those keys. But finally, maybe because Biden is a follower of the keys, as is his top advisor Ron Klain, who I've known for 30 years. I think he understood that while he could step down, he had to make sure that there would not be a loss of the contest key. That's why he so strongly endorsed Harris, and the party followed suit. That means they only lost one key. Moreover, now that I've had some opportunity to see the post-Harris situation, I think indirectly she could help the Democrats in two other keys. I think she dampens enthusiasm for RFK Jr. Because voters now don't have to choose between two old white guys. I hate saying that, being an old white guy myself, but it's true. Watch that. And I think without Biden so front and center, it's less likely you're going to see massive social protests. Plus, if Biden can focus just on governing, maybe he could pull off a success. You know, we already saw him pulling off the most significant prisoner swap since the Cold War. I haven't decided whether that's big enough, but maybe, despite the belligerence of Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel, maybe he'll pull off brokering a ceasefire and a hostage release, which again, I don't like answering hypotheticals because the devil is always in the details, but certainly has a strong probability of turning the success key.
Thank you, Daniel Burhane, for your donation. That's very kind of you. Vacuum tubes for hi-fi, with maybe our most out-of-the-box question we've ever gotten. You ready for this?
We've gotten some out-of-the-box ones.
I know. I think this might take the cake. How familiar are you with the history of recorded music and shellac 78 RPM records?
I will defer that question to the MFA from Emerson, who deals with the entertainment world, and I don't.
You think that's the most out of the box? I mean, I've never heard of shellac 78 RPM records in my life. Have you?
Ask me. Remember, I always say you can ask me anything you want. Don't ask me about the opera. That goes for whatever that was. But I was just asked that.
This isn't the opera.
It's not the opera, but it's outside my sphere.
Okay, there you go. There's your answer.
That was the most out of the box.
Yeah, I told you. Jesse Boone, thank you for your question. We've answered that question about 400,000 times, so I'd suggest you check old videos or check out either our Discord channel, which is linked in our description, or our Reddit, which is also linked in our description. So if you want to join our Reddit, if you want to join our Discord, the links are both in the description of this video. Adam Miran says, does this mean no recession now that the fear has eased?
Well, as the great Benjamin Disraeli once said, finality is not a word we often use in politics. But I would say the chances of a recession before November 5th are very close to zero. It's not something I'm watching anymore.
Ian Matheru says, today is the 50th anniversary of President Nixon's resignation speech. Please talk about the significance of this, and have you ever met Woodward and Bernstein?
I have never met Bernstein. Woodward is a close friend of mine. I've known him for many, many years. And he's terrific. He's as good as his image. He's just a great guy. And the best-selling nonfiction author in America. It's just amazing. I can't believe the way he's able to get people, including Donald Trump, to open up to him, say the most incriminating possible things that you couldn't imagine any president saying. Bob's a genius at that, The Nixon resignation is significant because the Watergate scandal was not just a break-in and a cover-up. It was a comprehensive effort to destroy our democracy. It involved illegal campaign contributions, quid pro quos with corporations, dirty tricks to manipulate the results of elections, a break-in at the office of the psychiatrist of Daniel Ellsberg, who had released the Pentagon Papers to dissuade people from being whistleblowers. It involved the use of the IRS against enemies. It involved the wiretapping of journalists and even members of the Nixon administration. But luckily, through multiple investigations, all of this was uncovered. And in a different time, Republicans recognized the threat to American democracy that Richard Nixon posed. And it was a delegation of high level Republicans, including Hugh Scott, the Senate Minority Leader, Barry Goldwater, the 1964 Republican nominee, who went to Nixon and said, "You have two choices. You can fight this, and you're going to be impeached with Republican votes, and you're going to be convicted with Republican votes. Your other choice to avoid this disgrace is to resign." And that's what Nixon did. Now, if in fact the Supreme Court's immunity decision had been in effect in the 1970s, there's an excellent chance Nixon would have gotten away home free with all the scandals of Watergate, would have remained as president, and our democracy could have died or have been significantly impaired 50 years ago.
Thanks for that answer, Dad. Laszlo P. Newman with a $50 donation. Thank you so much. They say
Awesome.
They say as the keys become increasingly more known by voters, do you have concerns your predictions may eventually start affecting voters' behavior as your prediction knowledge could affect their voting motivation one way or another?
I have no such influence and never would imagine I would have any such influence. But I've always told people, don't change your voter behavior. Vote. The keys have nothing to do with whether or not you vote. In fact, if you're influenced by the keys not to vote, that could change the whole pattern of history and invalidate the keys themselves. The keys depend upon a certain commonality over time, which includes people voting. I'm often asked that question. Well, why bother to vote? If the keys already give us the answer. But the point is, the keys depend upon people actually voting.
Good point, Dad. Reshiram says, "You seeing Brian Tyler Cohen next week?" ? Do you know who that is?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Do you know who Brian Tyler Cohen is?
No.
Okay, then I guess you're not seeing him next week.
Do you?
Yeah.
It may be someone who's interviewing me. That's possible. I get, literally hundreds of interview requests, and I try to be as generous as I can in responding, even if I don't necessarily know who the people are.
Well, Brian Tyler Cohen has like 2 million followers on YouTube, so he's pretty big.
Oh, so it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cook Political Report just moved Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina from lean Trump last night to toss-up with Harris as the nominee. What are your thoughts?
I think I talked about that at the very beginning, saying, Donald Trump has claimed, the polls show I'm way ahead. In fact, the polls have shifted, and Donald Trump is, in fact, likely behind now in the polls, which, as well as we'll leave it at that, because that's what only thing that he's going on.
Justin Cuddy, thank you for listening. Thank you for your donation. We talked about Trump's press conference in the beginning of this episode, so I'd rewind and watch it there. Is Trumpism really a branch of neo-fascism?
I'm very reluctant to use labels. I never compare someone to Hitler. I don't want to call Trump a fascist, or I'm not sure what a neo-fascist means. Fascist is a fascist. I am quite willing to say that he's quite open about wanting to be an authoritarian on the model of Viktor Orban in Hungary, which means snuffing out the opposition, killing off the free press, and controlling the government.
Nice. I don't mean nice. Sorry, that just came out. I just want to do some quick housekeeping. One, you can follow him on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Allan Lichtman, and you can follow me on Instagram and YouTube at Sammy Licht. In fact, I'll be live after this live for the Lichtman Live post show. It's in the description of this video, and I will also post a link in the chat. So if you want to keep hanging out and talking afterwards, come join me, because this guy only has so much time and energy to give, but we can keep chatting in my live. I just posted the link to it in the chat. Also, I posted a new video on my YouTube channel, which I haven't done in a while, so check that out. You ready for your next? How many more questions you want? You want to do some rapid fire, Dad?
Yeah, let's do 5 rapid fire.
Okay.
If I'm capable of that, being a professor.
Right. Try. Yeah, try.
I'll try.
Oh, and Alan is also on Facebook too, just so people know. Um, Janelle Lorman says, "Hello from Philly, gentlemen. Should I be cautiously optimistic about the future of this campaign? Could what's happening in the UK happen here if Harris should win?" I guess
I don't think
the
so.
unrest that's
I think the
happening.
UK situation is quite different. And I've already talked about the inability of Trump and his followers to generate grassroots protests.
Maddie says, "Will it be harder for Harris to get 2 terms than it would have for Biden since it's rare for the same political party to hold 3 terms in a row?"
That's not part of my keys. That does happen, not infrequently. The Republicans did it in the 1980s. The Democrats did it in the 1930s and 1940s. Republicans did it in the 1920s.
Brett Marcus says there was pro-Palestinian protesters at Harris's Michigan rally. With the DNC coming up, is it possible that these protests will flip to social unrest? We've already answered that before.
Already answered that. Very unlikely.
How do you handle discourse with MAGA family, Dad?
I don't discuss politics with them.
Right. You don't have much MAGA family either. Well,
Very little, but I
you
got
do.
some.
You do. Josephine Becker says, "Hey, Professor. As a history major, I'm a huge fan. My question for you is, what's the hardest election you've ever predicted and why?"
Well, we're supposed to do rapid fire 2000, of course, because it was not decided until you had all of this post-election controversy and the Supreme Court cutting off the recount.
80 Mart says, "What are you doing to prevent complacency among your millions of viewers when saying a lot would have to go wrong for Dems to lose?"
You heard what I had to say. The keys don't work unless you get out and vote.
Does failing to turn the foreign/military success key to true on Gaza automatically result in the foreign/military failure key turning false?
No, the 2 keys can split. For example, Jimmy Carter split the keys. He got the success key for the Camp David Accords and lost the failure key for the Iran hostage crisis.
Hero 75 says, "It's flying under the radar, but Ukraine advancement into Russia is currently happening. Would a victory or defeat affect the keys?"
Could. Again, I don't want to answer hypotheticals because the devil is in the details, but yes, that's something to be looking at.
Jasper Chu says, "How similar do you think Donald Trump's consistently held policy positions are to that of Republican right of 1945 to the 60s before Barry Goldwater rose to prominence?" Wow. Very educated question.
It's a really educated question and way too complicated for the rapid fire, but I would say in many ways they are quite similar.
Um,
And I have a book on this. I have a book on everything. It's not out yet. It'll be out next year. It's called The Truth About Conservatives. It's Not What You Think. And I talk about the continuity.
right. Arash Terry says, "Dr. Lippian, what are your thoughts about the Olympics?" They want to know your thoughts about the
I
Olympics.
love it. I'm always a big follower of the Olympics. Uh, Being a senior Olympian, I have a special interest, particularly in the track and field events. And we have had some amazingly inspirational performances, not the least of which was Noah Lyles running after being diagnosed with COVID and still getting a bronze medal and then collapsing afterwards. That was an unprecedented Olympic moment.
Alexander Garrison says, "Hey, Alan, once you make your prediction, is that prediction permanent or can it change if something major happens?"
As I said, according as Benjamin Disraeli said, finality is not a word we use, but I've never changed my prediction. And this idea of an October surprise is a myth. The only October surprise we've had in 160 years occurred during the Civil War. when victories by General Sherman and Sheridan changed the complexion of the war and the complexion of the politics of the times.
Jacob Wenner says, "Who is your favorite person in the media?"
Oh, God. Chris Hayes.
Walpole and Worcester says, "What would it take for another Ross Perot like third-party candidate to have any chance of getting the kinds of percentage he did back in the '90s in the future?"
Before I answer that question, I want to modify my last answer. My
Okay.
real hero, who I've known for 50 years, is Wolf Blitzer.
Ah, Wolf.
Wolf, my hero. All right, you got to repeat the question then.
What would it take for another Ross Perot like third-party candidate to have any chances of getting in the kinds of percentages that he did back in the '90s?
It would take one of two things: either a real grassroots movement for the formation of a new third party, or a very wealthy and very charismatic figure like Ross Perot.
Um,
We got to
Wendy.
wind this down.
Okay, Wendy, we answered your question. Zihan, they're debating on ABC. Final question from our one of our mods, Jeff. They say, "Can you briefly explain the XYZ affair and quasi-war with France during John
Oh,
Adams'
God.
presidency?" Maybe
these
that's
these
not the
were
best.
conflicts between France and the United States during the early republic. The quasi-war was in effect skirmishes on the seas, and there was a real possibility that the United States would go to war with France, but ultimately we went to war with England.
All right, you seem tired, so if you want to keep chatting, you can come on my live, you have to give me a few minutes to switch over, but I'll be live in a couple of minutes. The links in the chat and in the description of the video. Any final words to the people, Dad?
Yes, it's game on now that the tickets are set. Don't be fooled by the ephemeral events of the campaign. Keep your eye on the big picture of governance as gauged by the keys to the White House.
Thank you so much, and see some of you all soon. Say goodnight to the people, Dad.
Good night. See you Tuesday. Though I never see anyone except you.